Zizek's essay, The Detective and the Analyst, examines the similarities between a detective and a psychoanalyst. At first glance, these two figures may seem completely different. A detective solves crimes while a psychoanalyst studies the human mind. Zizek argues that both are engaged in the same kind of work. They try to uncover a hidden truth concealed beneath deception, confusion, and misleading appearances. Zizek begins by discussing an important cultural change that took place during the 1920s. This was the period when the traditional realistic novel started to lose its power. Earlier, realist novels tried to present life as a meaningful and coherent whole. They believed that human experiences could be narrated clearly and logically. But modern writers increasingly felt that reality itself had become fragmented and difficult to understand. Because of this, modernist literature emerged using techniques such as stream of consciousness, fragmented narration, and shifting perspectives to show the instability of human experience. At the same time, detective fiction became extremely popular. Both modernist fiction and detective fiction respond to the same problem, the difficulty of creating a complete and meaningful story about reality. Modernist novels openly admit this failure and show confusion directly. Detective stories attempt to restore order. A murder disrupts normal life, creating confusion and fear, and the detective tries to reconstruct the hidden truth behind the crime. The detective story therefore becomes an effort to rebuild a coherent narrative from chaos. Zizek connects this process to Freud's theory of dreams. Freud explained that dreams are not straightforward symbolic messages that resemble a rebus or puzzle. In a rebus, individual images do not make sense when viewed literally. Each image acts as a clue that must be translated into words or meanings. For example, a strange dream image may seem nonsensical on the surface, but its real meaning emerges only after interpretation. Detective fiction works in the same way as a dream. The criminal carefully stages the scene to create a false appearance. The goal is to hide the real crime and mislead investigators. The scene appears coherent and meaningful, but this unity is artificial. The detective's task is therefore not simply to observe obvious clues, but to notice strange details that do not fit the overall picture. These odd details reveal cracks in the false narrative created by the criminal. These meaningless or disturbing details are extremely important. They point to the hidden truth precisely because they disrupt the smooth surface of the staged reality. The detective must break apart the false unity of the crime scene in order to uncover what really happened. This resembles the psychoanalyst's work, where slips of the tongue, strange behaviors, or contradictions reveal unconscious desires and hidden conflicts. A very important idea in the essay is the concept of the false solution. In many detective stories, the detective initially encounters bizarre or misleading explanations. Criminals deliberately create fake patterns and clues to confuse investigators. For example, the murderer may try to make the crime appear mysterious, supernatural, or part of a complicated conspiracy. These misleading patterns are not accidental, they are essential to the structure of detective fiction. Detective covers the truth not by ignoring the deception but by understanding why the deception was created. The key question becomes, what message is the criminal trying to communicate through this false appearance? The false solution itself reveals the criminal's intentions. Truth is found inside the deception, not outside it. The detective studies the criminal's attempt to manipulate perception and thereby uncovers the hidden reality. Zizek introduces a concept from Lacan, the subject supposed to know. In psychoanalysis, the analyst is viewed as someone who possesses hidden knowledge about the patient's unconscious mind. The detective is treated as someone who can eventually make sense of chaos. Characters like Watson in Sherlock Holmes stories or Hastings in Poirot novels play an important role here. They represent ordinary common sense and the confusion of the average person. Because they cannot understand the clues, the detective appears almost magical in comparison. However, the detective's power does not come from supernatural intelligence. Instead, people believe that detective can uncover meaning even in the most confusing situations. His authority depends on this belief. The detective's mere presence reassures society that disorder can be transformed into meaning and chaos can eventually be explained. The murder itself represents what Zizek calls the real, a traumatic event that disrupts the symbolic order of society. A murder creates fear because it suggests that social rules and moral structures may collapse. Suddenly, everyone becomes suspicious and normal relationships are destroyed. The detective's role is to restore symbolic order by identifying one guilty individual. Once guilt is localized in a single criminal, society can return to normal. The community no longer experiences guilt and fear as something shared by everyone. Zizek next compares the classical detective with the hard boiled detective. These two figures represent different attitudes toward desire, morality, and social order. The classical detectives, such as Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot, remains distant from ordinary emotional life. He is detached, rational, almost outside society. He observes human passions without becoming personally involved in them. Even the detective's acceptance of payment has symbolic importance. By accepting money, the detective avoids becoming emotionally indebted to the client. He remains independent and objective. This distance also allows readers to enjoy the detective story without feeling guilty. The detective identifies one criminal who carries all the blame, while the audience enjoys the excitement and drama of the crime safely from a distance. The hard boiled detective, however, is very different. Figures like Philip Marlowe or Mike Hammer are deeply involved in the corrupt world they investigate. They are often manipulated, betrayed, or trapped by the very society they are trying to understand. Instead of standing outside corruption, they are immersed within it. In hard boiled fiction, the world itself appears morally broken. The detective experiences confusion, danger, and emotional involvement. He struggles not only to solve the crime but also to understand his own position within a corrupt social system. Reality itself becomes uncertain and dreamlike. The essay ends with a discussion of the femme fatale, one of the most important figures in hard boiled detective fiction. The femme fatale is usually a mysterious and seductive woman who draws the detective into danger. She represents more than simple temptation, she symbolizes a radical commitment to desire. According to Lacanian theory, true ethical commitment means refusing to abandon one's desire even when it leads toward destruction. The femme fatale follows her desires completely without compromise or guilt. In this sense, she embodies the death drive, a force that pushes beyond ordinary social limits and threatens stability itself. The detective is attracted to her because she represents freedom from normal moral rules. At the same time, she threatens his identity and sense of order. In the end, the detective usually rejects or destroys the femme fatale. This final act represents an attempt to escape the dangerous pull of desire and return to a manageable social reality. Through all these arguments, Zizek shows that detective fiction is not merely entertainment. It reflects deep psychological and philosophical questions about truth, desire, deception, and social order. Both the detective and psychoanalyst attempt to interpret hidden signs and reconstruct meaning from confusion. Their work reveals that truth is never simply visible on the surface but always be uncovered through interpretation.